Frank. Wait, we just have somebody.
Yeah, someone joined. Can you add that?
Let's do the let's get her. Waiting in lobby. Maybe I can do it for mine. Excellent. Let her in. All right. And all right. Kelly, did you start the recording?
The recording is started.
Wonderful. All right. So welcome everyone. We are here at the Act 133 Open Meeting Law Work Group. It is the 16th of June, and this is our 5th meeting. So we are approaching halfway through our meetings. So I thought we would start today. But actually, I'm going to back up because Kate, I understand that you need to leave partway through today. Is that right?
Hi there. Good morning. Yeah, this is Kate. So yeah, I am calling today from the road.
Okay.
From a child's medical appointment. So I will probably not be able to participate for the entirety of the meeting.
Okay. So we had scheduled to talk about today. We are going to wrap up our conversation that we'd started last week on technical assistance equipment training necessary for towns, municipalities to run effective inclusive meetings. And then we were going to get started on the accessibility guide that we are required to create, the polling location and public meeting location accessibility guide. And so I wanted to see about what the group thought about whether we would, I had us doing the wrap up topic 3 first, then moving to topic 4. Would it make more sense to flip that given folks' availability? I know Kelly also needs to leave early, but Kate, do you have a preference on which one of those topics we'd hit first?
Either work. It sounded like on the agenda. Was DRVT here today?
This is what we've got, I think. We are very, very slim today. So I don't think we have any other folks coming.
Okay. Then yeah, I guess let's go ahead. It would be great to flip that then, I guess. Thank you.
Okay. So let's flip that. So what we'll do first is start talking about the accessibility guide, and then we will go back and take up where we left off on the technical assistance piece. So I think what I plan to do first was just a little bit of orienting because we're halfway through, and I know this is just a gigantic topic, right? And we've been covering a lot of ground. We've got a lot of ground yet to cover. And so I wanted to sort of center where we are in our work and think about where we're headed. Because what we've done so far, right, is the best practice. We're supposed to recommend best practices for accommodations, many, many small subtopics within there. We're supposed to summarize the civic health findings. That was Robin's piece from our office. And then what we're going to work on partly today, which is identifying what municipalities need in terms of technical assistance and equipment and training to be able to do these things that we're hoping to recommend in the best practices guide. And I think, this is it's a challenging set of topics. It's a very, very broad set of topics, a very, very deep set of topics. And I think, we've had a lot of successes about navigating the really tough conversations here and picking out the resources. And I was trying to think about what tasks I want to assign myself and our office in going forward. I think one of our challenges has been getting all the voices to the table that we want here. And so, I know today's a really tough day, especially with the legislature in session and people's schedules went haywire. But going forward, I would like our office to try to make sure that we get some more folks here specifically. I know Lauren's been in touch with the Clerks Association quite frequently, but trying to get some clerks here, try and make sure that we have the School Boards Association here because we don't have them. And the one that I'm really missing for today's conversation and next week's conversation is the Human Rights Commission. So I hope to reach out to them and see if I can get somebody in the room going forward. And I noticed also, just to be thinking about our big picture goal here, of course, is to create this report to unfold all of our topics, right? And in our report, we are supposed to consult some other groups too, including communications union districts. Where's my list?
CUDs, really?
Yes, it was consult, CUDs, and a couple other groups, and other folks as needed. So one thing that I would like to task people to think about is who else we might want to either try to invite to be here for these discussions and or to be getting an early version of our draft guide to give us input. So if anybody has ideas about that, we can talk about it now, but I'm thinking maybe what we should do is just send them right to me and Kelly. And we can start compiling that and thinking about that. So that's one piece, getting more people at the table, getting more voices here. And then the other piece that I'm going to try to take up is getting us started with a draft document, because I think, these topics are vast, right? And we are trying to cover so much ground. And I think we're hoping in our office to go back through our conversations and just get like the roughest of rough outline down so we can have something to be looking at moving forward. So that is my goal, to try to have something on paper for the next meeting that we can be using. The next meeting isn't until another month out. So we do have, if these are kind of close together, we have a gap. So hopefully we'll be able to tackle some of that in-house. So my other ask for folks is, if there are any parts of this that you're looking at and thinking you want to have a hand in the drafting of, or you feel comfortable taking on the drafting of any of the small subsections, please let me know. We can talk about that as well. I know there are certain pieces in here, like for example, the civic health index piece. That's all our office, because we have that the division of one. But there are other pieces in here. I think the expertise is outside of our office. And so if anybody is feeling up to the task of doing some preliminary drafting, that would be amazing. And I guess my third ask is take a look at the schedule going forward, and maybe I'll send this out to people afterwards and just see if there's other if you look at the dates, if there are ones that from here you see you can't make. And if we have meetings scheduled that a substantial group of people can't come to, maybe we'll try to reschedule just in order to keep the number of voices, as high as possible. And I think that was it. Oh, and I just wanted to say, one more level setting, I think it helped last week that when we stopped having the substantive talk in the chat. So if we could just keep the chat for listing of resources, links, et cetera, and try to keep all of our conversation in one location in this hybrid space, but not in the chat space, that would also be a help. So does that sound, anyone have any questions or concerns about anything I just said? Okay, I think the other thing is, because we have a small group today, it's really possible we'll wrap up early. So I think we'll just take this as far as we can get. And if we get to a place where it feels like we've covered what we can in this meeting, we'll do that. And any extra time I will take to get started on that draft. So today we're going to start with, we're flipping the agenda. We're going to start with our task force obligation to create an accessibility guide. And this is two pieces. One is the polling location piece, which is something DRVT has done a lot of work on already. The other is, I would say, broader. It's the public meeting locations, which would include, town offices, that could be anywhere anyone is ever holding a public meeting. So you name it. And I think, I guess I was trying to think about how to approach this conversation, because I don't know if we want to start with the substance of what we think I guess we should start with the substance of what we think should be included in this, because there's the substance piece and then there's the delivery mechanism, like what would be the most useful way to deliver an accessibility guide. We have DRV has a voter's guide. We set this out in the agenda for the Vermonters with Disabilities. It's a pretty big document, pretty comprehensive, polling places only. Do we want a pamphlet? Do we want a book? Do we want an interactive something or other? There's all kinds of ways we could produce a guide. So I was messing with that in my head as well. At the same time, I was trying to think about what substantively information we want to try to deliver. So Where do we start? Shall we start talking about, I'm gonna pull up the exact chart. Produce a guide for accessibility for polling and public meeting locations. So do we have anyone here who has existing familiarity with DRV's survey? Nope, nobody?
Just gonna say.
Well, this
That's your copy.
this is my copy. I'm sorry, we sent it out.
What's the gist of it?
Well, the gist of it is that there is a federal and state, assorted mandates, right? That polling places be made accessible to people who have the full range of disabilities, mobility problems, but also other ones, visual challenges. And this survey was an attempt to try to assess the progress towns have made, or polling places rather have made, towards meeting accessibility requirements. And it looks like, Kelly, did you confirm with DRV that this is that we have is the most up-to-date one, 2018? Is that right?
I never got a confirmation back that
Okay.
whether it was or it wasn't, but if I
Okay,
do get word, I will send whatever the most up-to-date thing
that
is.
sounds good. So what we have in hand right now is their 2018 survey results, which is the one that's up on their website. So it probably is the up-to-date one. But I'm guessing they're continuing with this work. And it looks like they surveyed over half of Vermont polling places to sort of essentially using various checklists that the ADA the feds put out, the Department of Justice and some other organizations too, kind of looking at what the strengths are and where are the most common places that polling places are not in compliance. And so it's really a fact-based survey that they did, and they do have some recommendations for follow-up. And I think their goal is, as I understand it, is to hit every single polling place. So I don't know, it's quite possible that they even have done more without having the write-up, in existence. So that would be a good place to start, I think, in terms of what we're looking for here. And then in addition to that, they also have put out this voters guide, which is another thing that we sent out, and this is broader based. It's meant for the voters themselves and what your rights are. But I think in tandem with the survey, it's a useful set of documents that identifies where some of the needs might be. There's stuff without the clerks here, I think. Without that perspective as well. But so does anyone have
clerks that might be interested?
Well, there's that piece.
Yeah, I talked to my clerk who had not heard anything from the state group and was interested.
Okay.
That's Karen Bott in Middlebury.
Okay.
I don't know who else would go, or why the state association hasn't been more engaged.
There's just there's a lot going on.
Our clerk is very involved, Deb and Paulette.
Okay.
But she's working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. She's off. And others boroughs.
So without necessarily the expertise in the room on the documents we have for starters. And I'm educating myself some about these guys. If you take a look at them, reference various checklists that are in existence for polling places. And I'm trying to get myself up to speed on the existing legal requirements, because again, our guide's going to be, I think, when you talk about audience, actually, because I'm thinking it's an accessibility guide for these for polling places. Our audience is going to be, I think, tell me if they think this is wrong, both the users, right, the voters who are trying to use the polling places, but also those who are setting up and running the polling places. Does it seem like we want to go that broad, or does it seem like we want to focus on a guide for users. Anybody have thoughts?
So I would hope, this is Kate, I would hope that anything we put together around access for local government includes those opportunities to actually exercise the right to vote, but also be involved and engaged in every level of local government, including volunteering, being running for office, being part of
Right.
office,
Mhm.
doing local government. So all parts of
Mhm.
local government. I also just want to share that what DRBT has in that guide is definitely very much aligned with what the National Government Accountability Office has in their results. And I just want to reiterate that this is just for physical ADA required compliance. This is not for, when we talk about access, this isn't broad-based access for people with all varying levels of disabilities. It's just a very, very narrow starting point of like, here's what's required, not being done for physical overall universal mobility access.
Is there a lot of the problems in Vermont about that? I haven't ever heard of it before.
Oh yeah.
We did at our last meeting from Kate.
Yeah.
I mean, the physical access with handicap access.
Well, I think you look at, if you take a look at the, go ahead.
Yeah.
So if you take a look at the survey results, I mean, they're not, no one is saying, hey, we've got it nailed here. It looks like the numbers that they're seeing is between 1/3 and 2/3 are not in compliance with ADA in various common areas. And I'm sure that's,
Wow.
yeah. And they're finding what's, people are making their towns are making a good faith effort. However, there's a long way to go, I think. To Kate's point, I was cruising the HRC, the Human Rights Commission's website, to see what materials they might have, because for folks who may not be familiar, they enforce public accommodations laws in Vermont, towns being places of public accommodation, where town offices and so forth. And they have just a little pamphlet. This is where I was thinking about the various methods of delivery. They have just a pamphlet on, and it's just, this one's sort of to piggyback on what Kate was saying. This one is specifically geared towards sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and how to public accommodations, what accommodations are required under state and federal law.
Sorry, Jenny, where did that one come from?
Focusing on that. I'm sorry?
Where did that one come from that you're talking about?
I found it on the HRC's website. They have a few documents like this. Most of the documents that they have on their resources page are referencing out to federal government or other organizations. So there's not too many in-house ones
Did you say
that would
HRC?
complement. I'm sorry?
HRC?
Yes.
Human Rights Commission.
Vermont
Okay.
Human Rights Commission. Yeah, it's a state entity that's tasked with education and enforcement in various anti-discrimination laws generally, but one of their areas is public accommodations. They also do housing, employment.
Yeah, I know who they are.
And we do have their chair is an appointee here. So I'm going to try to get them in the room.
Is there a statute? There's statutes in place already that are saying they have to have handicap access, correct?
I think the point is that we have this framework as the floor, right?
Yeah.
And not everywhere, everyone is in compliance with that floor. And then there's going to be a range above that floor that we would hope, in order to affect complete universal access, you would go beyond the bare scaffold on the floor. So, and I think, Kate is talking about is what we have in hand is a very limited, we're addressing a very limited set of protections in this document, the DRV document, and there's a lot more groups, and there's a lot more, there's a lot bigger range of accommodations that we're going to, in order to be truly accessible, besides just looking at physical mobility situation. But to Kate's point, I think that our target audience is going to be both voters and also those who are handling the elections, assuming that there are plenty of people in both of those groups. And then there will be people in one or the other as well, and people might be moving between those groups as well. So that makes sense. Yes, Frank.
So if there's statutes, Kate, do you know if the statutes are okay? Have you guys got into that relative to this ground floor thing of the foundation, physical location?
Well, I think it's possible that we might make recommendations for changes in statute, but I don't know that that's necessarily what our group is tasked
But if
with.
it's fine, then it's an enforcement issue of that. We just endorse the statutes. But there's a list.
But the task here is to create a guide. So I think what we're trying to do, it's more about education and less about advocacy for this one number. Not to say that educating isn't in itself a piece of advocacy, but I don't think producing a guide is going to be the place where we are going to be addressing statutory recommendations. I think we are doing that in many other places, however, in our charge, because we are going to be making best practice recommendations, right? For how to make meetings more effective, more inclusive, increase participation, make them more accessible. But so we're talking about right now is the guide that we're going to try to produce, that something that is going to be useful for voters, for people running elections, to try to ensure that people know their rights and their obligations, right? That's my vision. If we have different visions, I would love to hear it.
And this is Kate. I'm gonna, just because I'm not online, I'll email an image. I don't know if people have seen this. I have not been able to access the previous meeting minutes, so I don't know if there's been ground setting around sort of the concept of like why universal design, what is accessibility versus accommodation, right? Like they mean very different things. So there's an image I'll send that I had put together in the past for state commissions to create hybrid accessible meetings, but and it comes from 508. But oftentimes what I'm finding when I'm working with disabled peers around the state is they are being told by their town clerks, oh, we meet ADA, right? Because they've just spent a bunch of money on putting in a wheelchair ramp. And so as much as possible, I just want to I really appreciate you saying that this is sort of the ground. This is like the very this is the lowest part of the tier, but it's not all the ADA. It's not the extent of accommodations, because a lot of people think that's the case. Like, oh, no, we don't need to provide this in a different format because we already have the wheelchair ramp and that's all that ADA is, or we have a parking spot. So that, so I'm just going to send this along because the concept of why accessibility and why universal design as the starting point is because once you create accessibility and universal design, the amount of effort that is required for individual accommodations, which still must be met, is easier and lower for everyone, right? So if there's a few things that you can do that's going to make everything easier and more accessible in general, and then people can ask for ASL, people can ask for electronic documents, people can ask, like all the other various accommodations. But the accessible universal design does not meet the requirements of ADA. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah.
I continue to be concerned that this is such a broad target. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, right, a solid waste district that entertains 2 members of the public in a year is very different than a select board, or a town meeting is very different than a town meeting, right? And to do a base level of universal design at every regional planning commission, solid waste district, communication union district, physical meeting place is a high barrier if there is no known need for anything beyond ADA in those spaces. And I think we might want to segment our report to different sized organizations.
We have it divided up into the guide piece, divided into polling places and public meeting locations. Yeah. So there is sort of a natural divide there in terms of polling place where we are conducting votes. The voters are gathering to make decisions versus where a meeting is holding, a public body is holding a meeting. there are very different levels of protection there for the people who are participating. There are very different requirements in state and federal law as well.
Sure.
But yeah, and yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think the universal design, we are tasked with, what is it? The use, well, recommending best practices for the use of universal design.
Mhm.
So that is something that we will be covering in a different place in the report. I think here, when we're talking about a guide, we're not necessarily, well, I don't know. We are making recommendations, I suppose we could in the course of a guide. But I think we're definitely going to want to be hitting what existing obligations are there, right? As the floor.
Sure.
And I see what you're saying, that you're thinking maybe sort of.
I'm saying what I would expect that the level of base accommodations in universal design made at the South Burlington City Council differs from that at the Wyndham Regional Planning Commission. And I would not want to set a seemingly unreachable bar for a very small organization with no technical expertise or resources.
And that we're absolutely, and we've been, Kelly and I were discussing offline, just that we don't think we really hit on some of the training pieces of the recommendations or the identifications that we were to meet. So I think when we get to that portion of the revisit of last week's or last month's, gosh, when do we meet last week's meeting? We can dig a little deeper into that too.
But
So are
sorry,
you?
can I just ask why? So from our
Sure.
perspective, a voting right is a voting right, and a civil right to be engaged in local meetings is a civil right. So why the disparity, I guess? So voters in more resourced areas have more of a right to be having access? Like, I guess I'm just not understanding the framework of that.
As I mentioned at the last meeting, right? And as Kate just repeated now, right? If you go to universal design, you still need to add accommodations for access for people that are not met by those designs. I think I heard Kate say that.
Yes, I said that. Yeah. So it's.
And if you have a very small audience, there is still a huge cost in universal design, which may not meet the needs of the people who would like to attend or participate there. And if you have a very small audience, the cost benefit of those measures may weigh very high on the cost rather than benefit. I know that my regional planning office is in the back through some halls that are potentially wheelchair accessible or could be made so in short order. But there are a whole lot of ADA floor kind of things that they would want to address before they think about these other layers. And I don't want to say, here's the 25 things that you should enact to an under-resourced group whose funding is being cut 6 ways from Sunday.
Yeah, and I think that's why this guide is so awesome. And what the power inherent in this guide is that no one is saying every single meeting of every public body throughout the state needs to pay $300 an hour for ASL, right? No one is saying that. But with universal access, it's not saying universal access means that everyone has access and no accommodations are needed. What it's saying is if you move forward with designing with universal design and universal access, the amount of accommodation requests that you're going to need to receive and that voters are going to need to make is substantively lower by doing some very small, very low cost in the scheme of things actions, right? So if towns were to see Zoom meetings as a utility for the cost of running business, like having heat, like having the lights on, because it is, the number of accommodations requests across the board are going to drop. Because with Zoom access, with a website, with having, electronic records available, with meeting the absolute law requiring, public meeting spaces and the ADA, like all of a sudden now the burden is so much lower because there's universal access. So I really want to make sure that the takeaway is that not if universal access doesn't mean everyone's accommodation is met at all times. It just means this is the standard. And once the standard is met, the number of accommodation requests are going to need to be much lower. You may still have people who are red, blue colorblind. You still may have people who, you know, have sensory differences that are going to need to have access to different spaces. But if you have large print font, if you have electronic means for screen readers, right? Like, I just want to make sure that, like, the conceptual piece of what universal design is something that's understood and shared.
To add on to that, I would say that,
oh, go ahead.
sorry,
It's good.
ideally, if people see the whole list, they become more aware of the large variety of labels and however you want, and even the way to talk about it, which would be an education piece, which would be a side benefit. So even if you don't expect all 25 or 50 things to be done, having them on the list so people are aware, oh, that's a thing, would be beneficial.
Is that Cynthia?
That is.
Okay, it's making sure. I saw your hand was up and I wanted to make sure that we got you. Good. Okay. Frank?
I think what we can do is brainstorm and come up with these resources, because the body that's making the decision on this is the legislature. All we're doing is providing a report with options to them to consider, correct? We're not providing a template for something to just them formally adopt, I imagine.
No, you know, I
always assume that the closer we are to something that the reviewing body can adopt, the better. The amount of effort and time that the legislature and its committees have is very restricted. We want this to be our best work.
and the charge for this particular number on here is to produce a guide for use. It is not a guide that's exclusive for use by the legislature. It is a guide for use by the community. So we're hoping to be producing a product that is something that can be shared with municipalities, with anyone who's operating a polling place, with anyone who is attending a public meeting. Like that is the goal for this particular number. And I would think for the best practice recommendations, it would be ideal to have something like that as well, although that is not specific to the charge. That is like a small step beyond the charge, but that is a way to make our work, I think, more useful rather than just leave those buried in a report. Right?
So essentially I'm for 100% inclusion with no exclusion in any meeting. Because if anybody wants to go, they should be able to go. They're just a taxpayer, just like everybody else. They should be able to go. So maybe what we're talking about is an inclusion statement that basically is backed up by statute, where, because people can move to a meeting, they can move the meeting site location to a place that's going to be like the meeting house that used to be famous all over the world. You know, people would go there, and that would be the place where they would have the meeting, and then not everything is ready to go there, plug and play. And so that's not too difficult to do, I would think. Some people just may not be going to their regular meeting place if it costs an exorbitant amount of money to redo a stone building, to put handicap and do all this door stuff and run into historic preservation relative to changing some of these older buildings is concerned. We're running into that. We have a grant for 2 buildings that are historic, and historic preservation, they want to preserve the building. And so what do? You know, then.
So we're recognizing that polling places and public meeting locations are going to need to be addressed differently in this document. Seems to be we all agree on that, right? Does anybody have ideas about what kind of document itself would be a useful mechanism for delivering this information? If we're trying to produce something usable, the idea, I think, would be in our report, we'll say, for number 4, here is the guide. Maybe it'll take a paragraph of explaining how we got there or what we felt was important or how, how we developed it. But I think that what we will be providing is an actual guide. I've been going back and forth on the delivery mechanism and
What are you thinking?
well, I guess I'm asking for ideas aside from, I mean, we could just do a document. We could just do a pamphlet. We could do a handbook. We could do something in between. Um, but I don't know that we necessarily have to be limited by that. And so I was wondering if anyone has given any thought to it or has any ideas that they want to throw out there at this point.
This is Kate. I don't have the raise hand function option, so I'm
Sure.
raising my hand. But if somebody else is raising their hand, go to them first.
Nope, you're it. Go for it.
Thank you. So I would love to have a document that starts with the values from which we are sharing this. And I loved hearing somebody say that this is really about inclusion. And so starting with the values of why this is important, particularly in a tight-knit place like Vermont. I heard someone share last week, time we met, that, about the opportunities for social capital building. Like, there's so much values-based stuff that we can start from. And then I think it's equally important to also share the actual requirements of the laws, both state laws and federal laws. I'm hearing people question, what are the actual laws? And so I think having the statutes available and the laws from which to start is also important. And I would also love to be able to almost do as part of the guide would be like a showing by doing, right? And so some shout outs like, hey, look, did you notice this was plain language. We just described federal law and requirements in plain language. This entire guide is designed with large font, sans serif, whatever. And these are the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. So sort of a meta guide that is super accessible to screen readers. I have yet to see very many state documents or legislative documents that actually have alt text in the images. So any of the images are completely inaccessible to people with screen readers or vision. And I would love to also see some case studies of some stories that we have from people who have just tried to be able to be part of their town's government. And what we're hearing time and again is, yeah, it is easier in large places, in more resource places, and the stories that are being heard in small places is that, oh, we don't have money for it, when in reality so much of access and so much of accommodation actually has nothing to do with money. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Kate.
Our town clerk goes to training and all this other stuff, and they're really nerdy about it. I don't know if you run into the same thing, Andy, but there's serious business about this polling stuff. And I haven't run into a case where it hasn't been serious business when it comes to the town clerks. And so I'm wondering where the voting thing is falling short, because if it was falling short, somebody be screaming about it, and I am not hearing it. Have you?
Yes, that's why we're here.
The disabled folks are screaming about it.
For the voting, is it widespread that people are not able to go vote?
Yes.
In what way?
Oh God, every which way. So I'll start with an email I got last week. Someone in the town of Waterbury, a resourced larger municipality, right, had reached out to their town clerk and said, I really want to vote. I did not put in a request for an absentee ballot. You know what? The law is in place. They don't have to put in a request for an absentee ballot. They could do car-side voting. They were told they could not. So that's one example. The entire town of Brattleboro. I don't know if you've followed any of a lot going on in Brattleboro, but people not being able to, even legislators. 2 years ago, there was a big illness outbreak in the legislature, And a number of legislators, like a lot, were unable to even provide their town meeting day reports that they needed to do because they were sick and they couldn't even participate via phone on town meeting day. And so it was like 15 legislators, I think, who weren't even able to give town reports. Myself, I have not been able to vote for 4 years. My husband is bedbound. He will never be able to vote. Anyone who is bedbound or who is living in a correctional facility or living in another congregate care setting for 180 towns, looking at the different level of voting for public options or for elected officials or for town budgets, they'll never be able to vote currently based on the way that the law is. So those are just a few examples. And then that doesn't even include things like running for office in places where there are floor votes and you need to be there in person, or where you need to gather signatures. And it also doesn't include people just wanting to be able to be part of the meetings and be able to access meeting records.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those errors or those situations were misunderstandings or a lack of education on behalf of those doing the polling?
No, it's systemic, right? So the way that, the folks in the room are going to have the numbers better than I, but I think based on the most recent spreadsheet of the different types of local, like we just do town voting. If we look at elected officials, representatives, budgets, and then public options, I think it's at least 175 towns just systemically by design. All the people that I just listed cannot vote.
Cynthia, I see your hand is up.
This may be irrelevant, but sometimes it is a misunderstanding on the part of the, say, the town clerk or the body about what the rules are, the SOS rules are about who can vote and who can't. And I wasn't allowed to vote first year I was here for a misunderstanding of that nature. So that wasn't an ability thing. It was just I would love to see the town clerk get really clear about who gets to vote and who doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, we're not here to lay blame, right? We're not here to point fingers and say, we're going to assume that most people are trying to do the right thing.
Right.
And that some of it, a lot of this is going to be misunderstandings about not understanding what the law is, not fully understanding what the perspective of somebody who's coming at something with different abilities, right? Like I'm sitting here in this meeting, I have people with off the screen. I am hard of hearing. When I can't see mouths moving, I have a tougher time. So this meeting is harder for me right now. People who can hear completely beautifully might not be recognize that until I say that, right? Until I mention it. Hey, I'm gonna miss some stuff. I'm gonna need people to say things slower or more clearly because I can't read your lips right now. And that's not something that somebody who is fully hearing capable is going to necessarily intuit, right? So it's not that I'm blaming anybody for not, and sometimes it's not possible. So anyway, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I just want to differentiate. I think Kate makes really important points, and I think, at least I certainly understand that there are some really key universal design features that we can highlight so that everybody understands them. I think clumping all of these issues together, when she said 173 towns, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, you're talking about town meetings and town meetings that hold floor votes on any given issue. And when a town holds a floor vote, by law, you have to be in the room in order to participate in that floor vote. And that is a design, you can call it a design flaw. I call it a design feature. It is a part of the fact that is the legislative body of the town. And so when we're fixing, and I really would love to fix a town meeting so that it can be accessible to people who are outside of the room, we're fixing it in a way that's very different from the way we would fix being able to say a thing at a public hearing, because it's a different process. You have 2 minutes at the microphone kind of thing is what happens at a public hearing, or a solid waste management district. Whereas town meetings are again a deliberative legislative body where people are empowered to make amendments and things like that. And so clumping that all together and saying that there are 173 towns that just need to, it's like, hey, just I think when we think accessible, we think put in that darn ramp or elevator, get a Zoom, function, and think that we can fix it that way, when in fact, some of these are structural decisions, and we need to be more surgical in the way that we solve them. And some of them are going to be easier, some of them are going to be way more complex. And we need to know that we are respecting the democratic infrastructure when we do it.
Well, I'd like to know what, I'm unfamiliar with the statutes. Kate, are you familiar with the statutes? Do you know where the statutes fall short on the accessibility?
So essentially, my take on it, I know Secretary of State's office is going to have another take, but systemically, we as a state have allowed towns to have the power to make the decision to go against federal and state civil rights and an article of our state constitution about who does and who does not have the right to vote, who does and who does not have the right to be running and holding an office. So if you look at our state constitution and what is outlined there for the basic rights for people to be able to partake in local government, like the way that structurally things are set up at the statewide, at the legislative level, makes it so that towns have the ability to discriminate, essentially. So it is a structural systemic issue.
And we should isolate on that in the report. It should definitely be there if that exists, what she's saying.
Sure, I agree. I don't necessarily think that is part of the accessibility guide that we're producing, but I think that is an integral part of many of these other questions that we'll be addressing in the report.
Yeah, it is. It's a foundational one.
Right.
If it's not there, it's what else are we going to be able to do with it? Basically, is in the same category.
And slightly off topic, but something that I forgot to mention before. We have our task list here. We do have a catch-all at the bottom of the list: study other topics as determined by the group that could improve participation and access to local public meetings. So if there are topics that we find to be relevant all the way up to important and foundational that we think are not in this queue that we're tasked with addressing, we can add in and put we can bring topics to the table. But that's only a slight tangent off to the side there, because I think that this is already addressed in here, or rather it is an obligation that we should be addressing what we were just discussing in this report.
Right, but
completely related, right? So if you like the calls and the emails that we get from people who are not having access to all levels of local government, it is a higher proportion. So of those 100 and some odd towns, right, it's a much higher proportion that people are having access issues in those towns. And part of it is attitudinal. So if you have, in-person meetings, and that is the focus, and that is all that you are doing is in-person voting and in-person meetings, people will say, well, yeah, we'd love for you to be part of our community, but you have to come in person for that. So no, we're not going to do a town website. No, we're not going to give you Zoom meeting access. No, you're not, we are Norman Rockwell, right? Like, you come here, you speak in person, and that is what we do. And that is what we call engagement. And so because of the structural design, it creates an attitudinal barrier as well that is much, much harder for people with disabilities to encounter, to overcome. So there is another piece to that. Like, even if we took out the voting and the voting part of it, everything else flows from that. And so those are going to be the same towns that don't have Zoom links. Those are the same towns that are not going to have any sort of like websites, right? So on and so forth.
Yes, Frank.
What I was excited about the training at the Rutland Regional Planning Commission was the 2 slides that you're cleaning up, is there something in the legislative? There was a slide that popped up that says that the intent of the last amendment was that the state do hybrids because they had all the technology to do it. And that the municipalities were a bell curve of different circumstances. And that, but the minimum was, that was put in there, was that the select boards had to do in-person meeting with a recording and would post a recording at a minimum. And that the planning commissions would have to do the same based on this decision-making criteria. And then otherwise there was the exemption, undue hardship, which apparently a lot of people have claimed for various reasons to get out of jail, and been successful because they make up their own reasoning for getting, you know, who knows if it would pass muster in the future, but they've decided to take the exemption. So that was explained in, and everybody in the room heard that hearing of the, as Lauren explained it.
So I don't want to revisit that right here because I don't think that that is part of this particular conversation. And we were talking about this open meeting law, and the open meeting law contains quite a few protections in the context of meetings of public bodies. But what we're trying to get at here is, I think, goes quite a bit beyond that. You know, the open meeting law has its set of requirements, but this, I think, accessibility goes far beyond what the open meeting law requires. And certainly, you know, the open meeting law only governs the public meetings themselves, not the actual location necessarily, until you go outside the open meeting law to public accommodations law. And polling places aren't covered there at all. So this conversation is,
Swiss cheese.
well, it's just much vaster than looking at the open meeting law and saying, here's what the open meeting law requires.
Right, but Kate brought up the accessibility from a digital perspective in this context.
Mhm.
And I was saying that the reason, one of the things, because she was saying they're not doing hybrid, they're not doing a video, they can do it. But right now, apparently that's not the intent of the legislative
Well,
body.
right now, the open meeting law does not require municipalities to offer hybrid meetings. Right? Right now, the open meeting law requires state public bodies to do hybrid, correct? And the open meeting law requires municipal public bodies to have the in-person stacked physical location. And hybrid is optional, though recommended.
And they have to record and post on the internet, the recording after the minutes of.
Well, the recording requirement, I believe, is in place only for public bodies that are not considered advisory. Is that right? I might not have that right. I want to check that. Don't quote me on
The
that.
whole advisory thing, I read the
Right.
striking.
So I think we're moving away from the conversation we're trying to have, though, here, the accessibility guide. I hear what you're saying, that municipalities right now, we don't have the full range of obligations for municipalities under the open meeting law. That's a legislative decision. Perhaps we want to recommend something different than what they have done in order to make meetings more fully accessible in that way. And that could be part of our report if that's where we want to go. Frank.
Apparently there's accessibility needs from a physical perspective, which is people getting into the in-person meeting. And that, if that's not fixed, and it should be fixed with some sort of, if it's not covered in statute, it's got to be covered in statute, I would imagine, and people are just ignoring it, then there has to be enforcement. What's the enforcement going to be? Because whenever you come up with ideas, what are you going to do to enforce it? All right, they don't qualify for any more grants until they fix the problem.
So right, I'm going to stop you because I think we're producing a guide. The guide itself is going to be educational material. I think education doesn't get you all the way there to enforcement, but education often is your first stop. That's where you want to go to try to get folks on board with what is most helpful, and enforcement is the next step down the road, right? So I mean, we can talk about that as other topics, but I don't think a guide for accessibility is going to really move into the enforcement realm at all.
A question for Sue, Kate, and Cynthia primarily. Of the cases that you've seen that are of different types, how many of them were a matter of that potentially there's something, a statute addressing it, that was simply not enforced, that where the person was aggrieved when the law was actually on their side?
All of them.
So it was a matter of enforcement then. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but we could talk about enforcement all day, but it's not a pretty process and it's expensive. And if you want that right to vote, it's going to take you 4 years and 20 years off your life.
So the statutes are fine, except for just a few repairs to the statutes, is what you're saying? In different places to get rid of this little catch-22 that we explained before?
Hashtag disability life. Yes.
All right, then we just deal on that, because that's the only thing that's needs to be fixed. Because otherwise it's enforcement.
So I want to say, from a disability perspective, where things have become more accessible to disabled folks is when it becomes universal. When non-disabled people get access to the things that disabled people have in fact been screaming for years or decades, then it becomes somehow accessible because, I don't know, ableism and discrimination, right? And then all of a sudden, systems don't say, oh, we're just doing this for this one person, and that's not right. They start saying, oh, we're doing this for everyone, and everyone likes this. People like having plain language materials for town meeting. Like, people really like knowing what they're voting for, right? Like, that is a thing. But if a disabled
A lot of us are nodding, Kate, just so you know, when you just said that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nodding going on.
Yeah. So I have a kid about to get in the car, so it might get loud. But so that's why it's so powerful to do universal design, right? Because it takes the bias out of it, and it just becomes like everyone likes universal design. No one doesn't like it, right? So yeah, that's part. I guess what I had shared with other people last week, but I didn't share more globally, is I realized when I came into the meeting that I was coming into this meeting with a lot of different assumptions. I had thought that there was more of a groundwork laid about like how this came to be, right? And why is it this was a requirement from the legislature? What were people saying at the legislature that had this be enacted, right? And so I didn't realize that a lot of that was not known or shared previous to this. And I really appreciate this conversation and what people are sharing in the room. Just thank you so much. And I know that this probably feels like taking a big step back in terms of the agenda, but I don't know that we could go forward without going back. So I just really appreciate it. Thank you.
Cynthia, I see your hand is up.
Yeah. Would it be offensive, Kate, to categorize the things that need to be dealt with sensory, or like I'm even thinking of icons? I'm going to the guide because that's what the agenda said. Vision, hearing, sensations, mobility. If there were icons that could precede the list of things that would assist to make it universal design, would that be a bad thing or would that be helpful?
I'm not sure, but I can imagine like things like, for example, having a microphone, like in a meeting, like everyone loves when people have microphones, right? Like, even if you're not hard of hearing, I don't know, people like, that's one of those universal design things. So I love that this is a guide designing universally for everyone. And you're right. I think thinking about like, it might be helpful as we design it to think about different categories of access. I need to think on the design piece of an icon, and I'm sure other people have really good ideas about it.
So just to to add on to what Kate is saying, and I do really agree with you about coming at it as coming at it as universal design. This is good for everybody, and it's definitely been proven, over time that when we do things like make things handicap accessible, all of a sudden we find out, oh, these are good also for, parents with strollers. And these are, good for all of these accessibility things actually serve all of us. And that's a really great way to go into it. I do think that we need to be aware that like something like microphones, it sounds like a no-brainer. And yet there is good data to show that when we require in a public meeting room someone to use a microphone, we get fewer people talking. Because one of the things that human beings are is also shy and don't like to stand in line in front of a microphone. And so it actually depresses the public engagement that you're holding the meeting to have. And so we can bring that knowledge to our solutions and not have a simplistic solution of just like put a microphone at the front of the room and have everybody line up, and actually say, hey, best practice is to bring children into the process and have them carry microphones to people who in their chairs, if you've got a large-ish public meeting, so that people can remain, if they want to, they can remain in their seat, express their opinion, but not in a way that feels quite as intimidating as some of the other microphone possibilities. So there are ways that we can take a, we don't want to be too simplistic in our answers, because humans are involved and humans are unfortunately really complicated.
So with that, I think since we changed the agenda around, I'm going to propose we're at just a little bit after 11. I'm going to propose we take that. Frank?
How do you legislate universal design? How do you put that into statute? That's beyond me at this point in time. Because when you're dealing at different committees potentially doing this at the same time.
So our task is to recommend best practices for use of universal design. I wouldn't necessarily say that it goes so far as to recommend legislation. However, I think that's an open
So
concept.
the best practices, period. It's an advisory piece.
Yes. Yes, although we can certainly take up what we want to in terms of offering potential legislative solutions as well as other ones.
So it's a planning document, not a statutory document. So basically what we can do is we can put we can put in the ultimate design and throw that at them. And that's the least we can do, is to do the best we can do.
So I'm going to propose that here we set aside, we have another entire meeting to talk about the accessibility guide, if I'm correct about that. Yes, our next meeting is entirely talking about our accessibility guide. So I'm going to suggest that we set that aside for now and move back to continuing the conversation from last week, which was what municipalities need in terms of technical assistance and training and equipment in order to be able to fully implement best practices moving towards full accessibility and greater participation. So, and I think I'm eye on the clock. I'm going to aim to wind this meeting up by noon instead of 12:30. Given the folks we have in the room and the folks that I would like to get in the room for some of these conversations as well. So with that in mind, I would like to talk about, I'm going to take this backwards because our obligation is to make recommendations about what technical assistance, equipment, and training municipalities are going to need. And we didn't really, I don't think, get to the training piece at all. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And I haven't gone back and reviewed last meeting since we ended it. But I would like to talk about the training piece because we have two separate requirements in our report talking about training. And one of them is, oh, did we lose somebody?
We did. I think she's coming back in.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. This is Megan.
Gotcha. Oh, hi, there's Megan. Yeah. So Megan, we had flipped the schedule to try to accommodate schedules of folks in the room. And we just wrapped up our first conversation about the polling location accessibility and public meeting location accessibility. And we were just moving into revisiting what we discussed last meeting, which is the technical assistance equipment training piece. What towns need, what municipalities require to be able to fully move towards the best practices that we hope to recommend for accessibility. So we have two places in our report where we're going to be addressing training. One is here. One is what training towns need, and not just towns, municipalities, to run accessible remote and hybrid meetings. And then also in our best practice guide, we are going to be recommending best practices for training public meetings for compliance with the open meeting law. And so those two are somewhat intertwined, obviously somewhat different, because the open meeting law is one law that governs how you operate public meetings or run open meetings, but there's much more outside the open meeting law that comes into play. So in order to recommend like what trainings folks need, I mean, again, we're back at there's the substantive piece, right? What substance do people need trained on? But then there's also how do you deliver those trainings? What kinds of trainings would be the most effective at getting folks who are already involved with their local government up to speed and comfortable, but also getting more folks able to participate as deciders in their local government as well. So the trainings, I mean, so we've done a few trainings, obviously the Secretary of State's office on some of these topics. I don't necessarily think I think there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of our delivery mechanisms. And so I would just like to talk about the training piece and what people think would be most helpful here and what we'd like to recommend. I know.
It's tough because, right, like it can't be specific to the implementation, right? There will be owls, there will be Zoom and Teams and Meetup and whatnot. And so I think it has to be much more on the conducting piece of this on like, do you designate someone to be responsible for including people not present in the room in the flow of the meeting? How do you implement the stages of the meeting in a way that provides maximum access to non-physically present attendees?
So training the meeting facilitator.
Yeah, and as well as, right, like I think every meeting space needs a quick startup guide, so that when the town manager's not available or the chair's not at a meeting, someone's got a really nice set of steps to start the meeting running and recording. But there are a lot of boards that don't have great chairs. People who could certainly use any kind of meeting management trainings that might exist. And I think it's doubly so when you get beyond people that you can see and that can demand your attention more immediately.
And then you got redundancy needs. Somebody can't make it knows the electronics and how to hook everything up. We had a planning commission where the chairperson, who is also on the CUD, led the CUD. She would be a great person to plug in there. She's still at that because their CUDs are still operating. They haven't shut them down. Where the fiber rollout is that she had all this stuff on the screen, and we were going down through the documents, and as a group, the planning commission editing the unified bylaws
Mhm.
and also the town plan, as it live in the meeting, going down through line by line by line by line, going down through the document. And I was very productive because it was also public and there was people in the room watching this. But the thing is when she wasn't there, there was no one there to do it. So the meeting fell flat on its face. So so you need to have the redundancy in the training, not just one person like they have now, where the select board has to take the training on the open meeting law. I believe is the only one that's required, but you have to need to have the vice chair, or other people have to have two people, even though it's not the select board, because in our meetings, the clerk runs the electronic part of the meeting, the hybrid. The chair of the select board doesn't do anything.
So broadening the audience, right? You want to make sure that.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Cynthia, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I suggested to our group that shadowing would be a good idea because our select board and is of a certain age where if we lose them, we lose a lot of knowledge of what's gone before, and that having some kind of a wannabe select board shadows who are paired to the current ones would be helpful to do that. And secondarily, I think the training should be available to anybody who is running a meeting, not just to town legislation. I mean, there's no marketing for just the general public encouragement to use it. I'm trying to do the 250th anniversary stuff, and I threw myself in the deep end of the pool, trying to get town people to do something, and I find I'm running these meetings and I have no clue, and it's actually very helpful to watch you do this because I'm like, oh, I could do it that way. So whether you have 25 people or 7 people, it changes things up. So training for everybody, include everybody in the training piece as well. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah. That shadowing sort of mentoring idea as a component of providing trainings is not a piece that I had even contemplated. So thank you. I think that's a great idea to include in the gamut of options here.
We've started implementing a very well-received cybersecurity training at work. This is totally separate. I'm not meaning for cybersecurity.
Yep.
That is a very different thing. But it's like these 3-minute vignettes, right? Of like, here's something that happened, and here is like the devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other. And it gets right at like one instance and how you might address it. And it's super quick. We do them once a month. They're very well received. And I think that if you pick little pieces, you might have more engagement than if you're like, okay, now we're going to conduct a excellent 2-hour select board meeting following best practices.
Are there video sound bites? Is that?
Yeah, it's a little video piece. Because we purchased these, there's like a 1-question quiz afterwards that's related but not exactly the same. But yeah, anyway, the brevity is the key to engagement on this.
People go into severe PTSD when they have to cross into learning something new digital in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And so it's not like it doesn't come in a spray can. And training doesn't necessarily settle in into, like, I've coached athletics at a very high level. And you just don't tell somebody to do something and that gets done. It's a longer process to get them so it's intuitive.
Hi, this is Kate raising hand for when that is appropriate.
Yes. Sure, it's perfect.
So yeah, and I think part of it too is like with the training, some of the things that I suspect people will share is how much more enjoyable the process is for them, right? Because they've had access to universal design. So for example, things like showing examples of like, okay, you're running a hybrid meeting. So here is a checklist of things you can do. Like when you are, if you're doing phone only and there's no way to raise hand, do comment stacking, right? Like, okay, we're going to hear from Kate, and then we're going to hear from Steve, and then we're going to hear from John, okay? And then, you know, you do that every so often so that people are aware of where they are in the process, so that people have access to be able to put their comments in the chat for the reason that I believe it was Susan shared, right? There are reasons just in general, and there are disability related reasons why people are not going to stand up and speak, or go up to the microphone, speak, even if the microphone's brought to them. So reading out the chat so that everybody has a voice. Repeating back the question. When somebody says something, repeating back the question. Making sure that everyone is understanding where we are in the meeting as it's being done so well here, right? So here's where we are in the agenda. Just want to reiterate the goals. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what's coming up next. Here are the materials that we're using. So a lot of it really is just fundamentals of good meeting facilitation, because good meeting facilitation means inclusion and accessibility.
Bingo. I don't think we can overcome somebody's fear of public speaking without hiring psychiatrists to figure that one out, because they just simply are going to get up and say something, or they're so afraid to get up in public. What are you going to do? Have a proxy maybe, or a written submission? What's the alternative? Because Susan was bringing that up, that people are afraid to talk in front of a microphone, and how do you rectify that?
Well, I think that was, Susan mentioned one option, right? Is to not make people stand up in front of the entire group in a long line waiting for their turn, and instead bringing the microphone to folks. I think there's plenty of small steps you can take to make spaces feel more comfortable for
Yes.
more people.
I think there's
we,
also-
we do that routinely in our town meetings and select board meetings.
Susan?
Well, I was just going to say that I think that what we need to think about, and towns need to think about, public engagement throughout the year. We need to think about that each meeting is an event, but public engagement is an effort. And so if you think about the whole year, you have to have lots of different ways to engage with the same topic. If you're redoing the town plan, change up the way the information is gathered. Include anonymous surveys. Also include meetings where people can have small conversations, not big ones where they have to give speeches. Include, facilitated, large and small group process that are hybrid. There are lots of different techniques, and to me, that's when we try to fix every single event to be perfect for every single person. I mean, it's a goal for sure. But I think a better way to think about it is, yes, we want that. And let's think about participation throughout the year so that a person can feel like this is my town and they want me. And they are offering me all different ways, field trips, whatever it is, to bring in my, different learning styles, different engagement styles, different family structures that can engage them.
And with that long-term engagement comes trust, which is the piece that allows you to feel like you are allowed to say something and that you will not be ostracized for your opinion.
Is there anything specific, just to backtrack to the open meeting law? I think all of these things apply to both pieces of our training recommendations. Is there anything specific to best practices for training public bodies for open meeting law compliance that would be additional to what we've just discussed that anyone can think of right now? Oops, I see Megan's got a hand.
Yeah, hi. Jenny, it would be helpful. Thank you all for your patience coming late. Sorry to miss the first topic, which I understood was accessibility of polling places, right?
Right, and also public meetings, both.
Okay.
So public meeting locations. Yeah.
So I'm trying to get a grip. I feel like my life is just trying to get a grip.
Oh, yeah. So we flipped the agenda. So we,
So we're
yeah,
on
so we
three-
flipped the agenda and we jumped in on the second half that was starting at 11:15, the polling location accessibility and accessibility for public meeting locations. And we are just when you came on, we were just moving back to the first half of the agenda, which was the trainings for municipalities.
And
This
can
is training
could
like
we-
the secretary. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Could you be more specific? So is this, we are making recommendations to
Uh-huh.
who and around, and are these two separate? One is on open meeting law compliance and one is on running remote hybrid meetings?
Yes. So in our report, there are two different places where we're making essentially recommendations or identifying needs. And the one is wrapping up from what we started talking about last week. It's part of our task to identify what municipalities need to run effective and inclusive hybrid and remote meetings in terms of tech assistance, equipment, and training. So what training would they need to be able to do these any remote or hybrid public meeting? And then additionally, as in a separate place in our task, we are to recommend best practices for all sorts of things, but among them, best practices for training public bodies in compliance with the open meeting law. So there's some overlap there, but we do have a specific obligation to address open meeting law trainings, specifically public bodies, which would be local and state, right? And
we didn't really wrap up. We didn't really wrap up the technical.
Oh no.
We have, okay, because I think that the small group that met once and then Susan and I
Yes.
met sort of began to sketch out some options
Yes.
for hybrid remote. We didn't really
Yes.
talk about archiving options. So
No.
I'm not sure, can we talk about training? I've heard, besides, of course, hearing good things so far, do we need to finish sketching out those two pieces of the
So my
technical
thought-
options?
Yeah, so my thought was I was taking it in reverse order only because last time we took it in the statutory order, and I felt like we didn't get to training at all. And so I wanted to make sure we made some space for that here. But yes, I think I started with training, and then I think for the rest of the meeting, moving on to talking more about the equipment piece and the technical assistance piece that's the remainder of our meeting. And I don't know if you heard that I think we're gonna end at 12 today instead of 12:30. So we have half an hour to work on that. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. Appreciate
Sure.
that.
Oh, sure.
This is raising hand to answer the question you had asked when you're ready.
Yes.
In terms of what things could be shared specifically, like concretely, for technical assistance, I think that a lot of towns are uncertain, like they don't know the resources that exist that are absolutely no cost. So for example, I heard from my town that they could not share meeting minutes electronically because they had no website and they had no money for a website. So literally it took me 10 minutes. I made a Google site. And now all the minutes that they send me are listed on the website. It takes no time, completely free, right? So even something simple like, there are free ways to host, not even just Google Sites, but Google Docs. A lot of people don't know about that, like putting PDFs on a Google Doc. Voila, there you can share something ahead of the meeting. The other thing is with Zoom, a lot of people don't realize that Zoom has auto captions. So auto captions is amazing. Everyone can click on and turn on their auto captions to have that. And most people really, really enjoy that, disability or none. Another thing is getting to know the accessibility options of Zoom. And so when you go into the settings, really getting familiar with all of the different settings, you can change the font size, you can change the color contrast. There's a lot of different settings. So I think all of the free resources and getting to know the tools via training and technical assistance is quite useful.
So on the training piece, I think the things we've really highlighted here is trainings on good meeting facilitation in general are essential, are even more essential when you're managing more than one space, right? And then the second piece of getting to know the tools and getting to know what resources are out there and delivery mechanisms, the idea being to maximize variety, right? How many different ways can you deliver information so that everybody has options that work for them? And also the soundbite short ones being part of that menu. Okay.
And also some infotainment, because people are repelled by the idea of training of any sort. And so to call it training might put them off. So maybe a little investment in creative hype without going overboard would be great.
Yeah.
One of our select, we went, Rutland County had a training event at the regional planning commission offices, hybrid. And we had a large number of people from our town go because of confusion around open meeting law. And the guy sat next to me, he was Tom Collard, he runs big companies. So he's on the select board. And he was looking for the promised slides from the meeting in order to review, because he wasn't taking notes. He was going to use the playback of the meeting and the stuff to address things at the following select board meeting when the topics came up. But he didn't have that. So when they went to a lawyer and got a lawyer opinion who may not have all the information, he couldn't respond because the promised materials were not delivered at all, and they still haven't been delivered. And so we have a problem relative to complying still, when after the training we should have been totally clear, and that's totally fell. It didn't happen. So why did the meeting happen in the first place? Training, if the full promises of the training were going to be, oh, here's this slide deck, here's the.
So I'm going to stop you here because
that's a big issue.
Revisit this offline if we need to.
That's a big issue.
So our office is tasked with delivering trainings to municipal officials on the open meeting law. And we are in the process. We also do a lot of other open meeting law trainings beyond that statutory requirement, which is new. We are in the process of updating all of our materials with the new legislation that was just passed into law and is effective July 1. So that is something we are working on, which are, we have a handbook, we have PowerPoints, we have in-person trainings we do, and we're trying to get more website information in more of the soundbite format, like FAQ format, up on the web. So that is something that we are working on now that we hope to have publicly available. What we're not doing is sending out our old stuff that isn't fully updated at this point. Yeah. So I'm going to move on from that. I'm going to move on from that conversation, Frank. I'm going to move on from that conversation. Okay. We can talk about it another time. We're not going to visit that in this meeting because we only have about 27 more minutes to go.
May I offer a technical thing?
Sure.
Is that I spoke with the fellow who does the Homeland Security handicap access with electronic stuff. And he travels around like 3 states or something. And he says that most of the handicap have their cell phones capable with speech to text, with all their aids they need, because they need them on a minute for other things other than going to meetings. And so that if there's a hybrid meeting going on with audio, that their phones can pick up the speech, convert it to text, and they can follow along with the meeting with the cell phone devices that they have now. Now, I've never experienced that, but he was saying, yeah, that's what's going on out there. So I'm wondering about that.
So I think, to level set here, I think our group's goal is not to put the obligation back on the individual to figure out how to get themselves involved and supply what they need. I think our goal is to figure out how to make spaces welcoming to everyone by incentivizing and educating and helping the folks who are creating those spaces and operating those spaces. So I don't want to be in the place of saying folks have what they need. They should be bringing it to that. They should be bringing it in. I don't think it's necessarily true that everyone has what they need there either. There are plenty of people that don't have cell phones. There are plenty of places that don't have cell phone access. I wouldn't make the assumption that every person already has access to all the tools they need to be able to join and participate in meetings and government generally.
His experience is the disabled are using these devices to live these days, and that most have them. That's one of the considerations. I just want to say, from a guy who does it on a daily basis and as his job, that's what he told me yesterday, as a matter of fact.
And it sounds like it's one person's experience.
Yeah, but that'd be a good thing to know. How prolific is it out there, where the people come to the meetings already have the tools, so they just have to engage with our tools, and boom, it's done. Otherwise, we provide a few tools that can be engaged with, because you get on a screen like this screen here. If I'm in the back of the room, I can't read the text when it's speech to text. They're going to have something in front of them or on their phone to follow along with the text.
Sure, but we're not dealing with specifics right now in this forum. We're talking about the scope of training, not particular accessibility tools and platforms.
But the person even attending the training meeting is going to be the same. It's an open meeting. It's going to be the same handicapped person who we're not excluding to attend, who's going to be attending the training meeting. Everybody's inclusion 100%.
I think
At all meetings.
that there are a lot of people who have a lot of expertise because they've had to deal with situations based on where they're coming from, and you want to make sure the people with the expertise are in the room and you're making decisions. Certainly.
And
So
when we talk
someone's
about
trying to-
disability, in your
Yeah, go ahead.
it's anywhere between 1 in 3 people to 1 in 5 people who have a disability, one or more disabilities. So I just want to make sure we're not talking about a disabled person. It's like a large amount of your town, between 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 people have a disability.
And accessibility isn't just about folks with disabilities either, right? I mean, even on our list here, we're investigating whether increase of resources for participants, such as childcare, translators, transportation, food. I mean, there's a lot of things getting in the way from people being able to fully participate that isn't limited to disability, right? Language, childcare, transportation.
The ADA has cases now where anybody in the autism spectrum is now generally included as protected under the Americans with Disability Act. Boom. So that's 1 in 31 now.
Why don't we move to the continuation of that equipment and technical assistance conversation, moving away from the training piece and getting back into the necessary equipment and technical assistance. I think we've been kind of moving that way a little bit here anyway for our last 20 minutes or so. And Megan, did you have a place that you wanted us to start, or questions that had been top of mind from where we left off? Nah. I'm not trying to. It seemed like that's a piece that you were interested in, and I know we certainly hadn't, and I don't think we're going to finish the topic today. I'm clear about that. Like, I think we're gonna mull over it some more. We're gonna put more information out there, and then hopefully we'll revisit it as we continue through the rest of the topics.
I guess what I would like to see happen, if I can follow up on what you're asking me, is some more clarity. I'd like to, and I haven't done this yet, is be more specific about those tiers of technical options and overlay them with some of the goals and how they do or don't meet accessibility measures, where they may fall short and where they may reach
Mhm.
so that people can be thinking aspirationally. And I would like to make sure that our price points tied to those different technical options are
Mhm.
clear. And
Mhm.
I mean, I just haven't dug into it since we
Mhm.
last met. And so,
Sure.
yep.
Mhm. Okay. Yes, Frank?
I'd like to hear from Megan. What's your view? What do you think should be the scope of the archiving issue? Because that's something you brought up on several occasions. What do you think that 170 towns and stuff should be doing for archiving and relative to hybrid, or what levels? Because we already
that-
have the minutes to the meeting, the written minutes
Well,
of the meetings,
Is
official
that
record.
this meeting or is that on a different agenda item? I just didn't want to get off track if that was.
Well,
I
she
didn't-
had brought it up. That's what I was wondering.
well,
So,
I think it's a separate, I think it would be useful for if similarly the small group or a small group met to come up with some frame around archiving. Because I think it doesn't make sense for any one person to make a recommendation blanket without listening first to find out what are people doing? What are some different technical options out there? What has worked and what hasn't worked? And certainly the Vermont Access Network has some
Mhm.
things to offer. I think the
Mhm.
Vermont Historic Records Project would have some information to offer around archiving.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think that's what we were trying to do with the hybrid remote meeting is sort of listen into the ethos of what people are doing,
Mhm.
use that research and expertise to put forth some options that people could do.
Mhm.
And then again, to put a price point on it. So it would be useful to have a smaller group meet around archiving, and maybe that includes somebody from the records project.
Mhm.
Is that related to the Vermont Digital Archives Project?
Well, I mean, so many people are doing, the digital archives. I don't know. I don't know if that's,
There's statutes around archive.
I don't find a homepage for the records program,
the Vermont
just a YouTube
Historic,
channel.
the Vermont, the VH, it's the division of the Secretary of State's office. So Jenny may
Okay.
know what I'm referring to.
Part of-
Tanya,
Tanya's,
yeah,
and that's about all I know about it. But yes, it's out of out of the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration.
Okay.
yeah. And so they have, and I will also say that, yeah, so I mean, it's basically like, I mean, again, without leading with the solutions, it's just
Mhm.
what are people doing around the state around
Yeah.
archiving of municipal meetings? What's working well? What needs more support? And I understand that there's the current statute, which is 30 days. You know, again, I think that's completely, that's fine. It's the statute, it's the law. I think we could recommend practices that allow folks to hold on to meetings for longer. There could be an argument for not holding on to meetings, but I wouldn't go down that. I'm not interested in going down that route. I would like, yeah.
Mhm. So I think that piece of things falls under our best practice recommendations, that long list, the best practices for running effective inclusive meetings, best practices for universal design, best practice for open meeting law and training, and then best practice for recording meetings of municipal public bodies and the means and timeline for posting those recordings. So I think all these things are so wrapped up in each other, right? But I think that one's going to fall within our best practices guide, which I think is something we're talking about literally every single meeting, because what we think on all of those topics informs every other obligation we have under this statute. But so I'm just looking to see, this is, I don't know if so I guess that it does fall within this though, right? Because if we're saying to run effective and inclusive meetings, we need to have a means of making those recordings of meetings available and accessible and usable and findable and all of those things for people, at least in the short term, and arguably in the long term, depending. Then that is a piece of this. What equipment might you need? What technical systems might you need? Right. So I think there is a place for that in this item. That was, I just thought that out loud. So thank you for listening to it. So I think it is fine if folks want to meet together non-quorums offline. My hesitancy to try to organize subgroups is that if folks are talking about things non-quorum offline, we are not within the open meeting law. If we are directing and tasking committees to do work, then we're bringing those groups in under the open meeting law. And I don't want to be personally trying to be following up with umbrella or parent child. I'm trying to figure out the word is with smaller groups. We're not set up to be following through with all open meeting law obligations for committee groups. So if people want to have offline gatherings to discuss stuff and work on things, I think that's great. And bringing it back to the larger group, but that is not something, like if I'm not going to be participating in the meeting myself, I'm not going to be able to making sure we're meeting all the obligations for the open meeting law for those groups. So that's why you're not hearing me jump in and say, I'm assigning committees and subgroups to do this work and to bring it back. Yes, Frank.
I think Megan will agree, and Susan possibly, and Andy, that initially there was a proposal. Megan, I think you came out with or Susan came out with a pretty 4 meetings, and we had quite a chunk of time for those meetings to be set up, and that conflicted with Andy's schedule and a little bit with mine, but I was open to jump things around. So finally we got 4 of us together, and then we had a spreadsheet we worked on, and then there was another meeting that Andy couldn't make, and then I had a last minute changes in my scheduling, so I couldn't make it. And it was 2 times, sometime it was either 11 or 2 o'clock, one or the other. And so then it became a problem. And I would like to have been there, but I couldn't. And Andy, I think, would like to have been there, and he couldn't. And so then you worked on the text document, which was pretty much a large part of the last meeting. And that was the first time I'd seen it, from that perspective. So it's difficult to get all the ducks in a row and herding chickens and all that metaphors, but for these smaller meetings to where you're respecting quorums and you're respecting certain number of participants in a meeting to be there to get the openness of the meeting itself presented out to other viewpoints. So yeah, I think you're correct on that.
So Kelly included that document in the agenda, so everyone now has a hand on that. And I think we're all just building on each other's work. I think that's going to be something that we reference when we're drafting up the very rough draft that I'm hoping to come up with as a starting place, as a secondary starting place for us to work on. So I think yes. Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, could I ask another question process-wise? So you're talking about best practices guides from the Secretary of State's office. Is that what we're going to present to the legislature as our report? Or are those 2 different things?
Well, so our report has 8 components, 7 substantive, and an 8 is a catch-all, study other topics.
Yep.
One of those components is for our group to recommend best practices for a list of things. So
Got it.
effective inclusive meetings, universal design, open meeting law training, recording meetings, those four. So in our report, the floor is we must recommend best practices for all those things. Lauren's idea, and I think it's a good one, is to try to transform that into, if we have the time and the ability, this group, a best practices guide. So that in their report, we could say, here's our guide, this is what we're recommending, and hit that. And then therefore we have a usable document that's not just, bullet points in a report that folks don't necessarily read. Instead, we have
It never gets turned into anything useful.
right. Instead, we have a
Yep.
document that we can share out into the universe.
Yeah.
And I think that would be that's a goal. Whether we'll get there, I don't know.
Okay.
But at minimum, we'll be providing to the legislature recommendations for best practices that we could then transform into an actual guide if we don't get there by November 1.
And
That
so
is
I
one
have
part
a
of our report.
follow-up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. Well, my follow-up question there is,
Yeah.
so we have, for example, best practices are our best practices limited to the current statute? Or are we also going to make recommendations for expansion or changes to the current statute? So if we're making recommendations around hybrid remote meetings, and we say it's a good idea for everybody to do hybrid remote meetings, I think we need to acknowledge what's statute and what's not statute. It's a good idea to archive your meetings in this way,
Mm-hmm.
but the
I think-
statute only says 30 days. And if it's only 30 days, I mean, if somebody came to me and was like, I need to save my meetings for 30 days, what's the best way to do that? I would say put them on a hard drive, back them up here, and then delete them every 3 months, right? It's a very different thing.
Right. So you're saying best practices to comply with existing statute is very different if we're saying best practices in a perfect world where we had the statutes written the way we think would actually maximize accessibility, or right. So
Yeah, and maybe
right,
there's
so
a spot
right.
between here
Yeah.
and a perfect world, right?
Right. Oh, of course.
With each town having the financial resources of the state. That's how
Well,
it's
so
right.
right. So I think that that is a good question. I think how I would think about addressing it would be having a best practices guide for statute as is, but being very clear in that, or at least it's in the context of the report, right? Especially if we're doing a guide that goes out into the universe, we would want to then put our caveats in the report if we're saying that this is how you would do it if this is the universe we're operating within. However, we think it would be a better universe to operate within if we could change the law to say XYZ or to address this problem. In which case, these best practices our practices would change accordingly, right? That's how I would think I would address it. That there would be text within, if we have a guide that's going to be out in the universe guide, it would be current law, and then we would have wraparound text in the recommendations to the legislature saying, we don't think the law goes far enough in these areas, and we would adapt accordingly if you would. Yeah, Frank.
The current
think-
law,
I
Megan
do
wasn't
think that
on
that's-
board. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Megan wasn't on board when you clarified that the tiers, the state, the hybrid and the municipalities, there are a different requirement as far as the hybrid needs.
Right. The statutory obligations are different.
And that's confusing in the statute itself, but Megan,
Yeah, right.
the municipalities aren't required to do hybrid now. Under,
I think Megan's on board with that too.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Susan, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think that the best practices piece will be, a interesting and good process. I think once we start getting into what do we recommend that the legislature change, that's when the rubber hits the road, and all of a sudden we find out that that's why this committee was created the way it was, is because some of these issues are things that the legislature has tried to address and found that there's not agreement. Some of these
Mhm.
things are really gnarly. Some of them are common
Mhm.
sense, and some of them are like, wait a second, is this a mandate or is this and you know, Andy's talked about tiers, like, you know, maybe these are recommendations for, you know, towns or whatever committees with resources and with a smaller audience, you know, and it goes on up. So I think that is a very charged, and it's just so weird that we have so many interests that haven't even been represented in these conversations.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's not gonna be. I just want to set that aside. It's not it's not going to be as simple as it sounds. I think perhaps, but best practice, I think we should be able to.
I don't think any of it sounds simple for the record. I think every single one of these tasks is huge in and of itself. And I agree. We need more folks in the room, and that's partly why I want to try to get something down as the roughest of rough drafts. So we have something to be like, if you can't come to sit here in the room with us, can you at least look at this and tell me like where the giant gaps are and where I'm flat out wrong and where we can take it further. So that's my hope.
Which is why I asked to convene folks that have a distinct interest so that we have some meat to work on. But I think, and I'm happy to do that again. I recognize, with an acknowledgement to Frank that of course it's going to be difficult to schedule us. But I think if we share back our findings, it's actually more accountable than just coming with our own specific interests.
And Megan, I can try, if it's helpful, to figure out who specifically at Vassar might be a useful person to participate in that kind of conversation. I'm not sure who it would be right now, but I'm sure I can find that out fairly quickly. So I will do that.
Which organization was that?
Oh, from the Vermont State Archives folks for the historical records project.
Yeah, like I know that they stood up a video archive at one point, and then there's beginnings of creating a kind of statewide archive. I think there's work that they're doing. It may not be where it's at, but I think tying it together. And I think regardless of whether we think we're going to get funding out of the legislature to support municipalities taking up hybrid meetings, as an example, I think we have to come up with I think we have to present them with a picture of where we're at as well as best practices. I think without presenting them a picture of where we're at currently in the state, who is supporting this work, who's already doing the training that the Secretary of State's may or may not have to pick up on its own, who's already assisting with archiving and access, where those funds are coming from. Unless we have that picture, who's already supporting, doing disability rights is doing already regular surveys of towns around accessibility issues. To lead with best practices would be fine, but I think we have to match it with a mirror that we hold up to the state about where we're at.
I don't imagine that information exists, Megan.
What information?
A survey of current practices.
No, Disability Rights Vermont was saying that they currently do a survey around polls, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. The last we had is 2018.
Okay.
And that's just for polling places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know. Exactly. But that would be a mirror. That would say up until 2018, Disability Rights Vermont was doing surveys of polling places.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that the town clerks could theoretically be in a good position to fill in some of that.
Yeah. But am I not making sense, Andy? In terms
I get it. Yeah. No.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
And I think, in the tasks that were given us here, the legislature did include something like that for the voting end of things, insofar as we are to analyze voter turnout and the voting methods currently used throughout the state. That's a specific task that's on here. That's something that we're hoping our elections team.
Jeepers.
Wow.
Oh yeah, isn't that nice? I know.
You can do that, Jenny. We'll sign
Well,
up.
I think that we are hoping our elections, Sean, and our elections folks can take the lead on that piece. But that's something that they recognized, I think, in this task, that if we're doing all these things, we should be talking about what's voter turnout look like right now. What methods are we using right now? And there isn't something like that specifically stated in here for the public meeting side of things, but I think it's an absolutely good point. To the degree we can compile what exists, it's out there, and look at that and also reference that, right? That we're not operating in a void, right?
Community
And
nurses.
Go ahead.
Community nurses are a great resource for small towns to be able to do an informal survey of what's needed, because they're out and about. We have and also food shelves and things like that. As a certain population, they are aware of the preventions of people coming and participating more than most people would be.
And I think we can take that up too with one of our other topics, which is looking at whether increased use of resources for participants, and they list out a whole host of sort of childcare, translators, transportation, food, including hybrid meetings, and also other accommodations that you might think of are directly related. Looking at those and saying whether increasing investment in those resources would have a downstream effect. And I think that's going to be part of that conversation as well. I think
on the investment side, I had a conversation with an office staff in our town, clerk's office. And I had a change that needed to be updated to the website. We have a contractor handling it, and any little change has a bill that's associated with it. So they were discouraging changes to the website because of cost factors having to do with their budget of updating the website. So all this stuff costs money, and it's payroll money is the worst kind of money, because tech you can buy and it's in there. And if the state wants to pay for it all and house it all at the state level, then all the towns have no cost. It's all here at the state, and then you got it done.
The state doesn't want to do that.
Well, that's the only way it's ever going to get done, because otherwise you have no enforcement. We just talked about enforcement, Megan. We talked about enforcement, that there isn't any on existing handicap access rules, just the simple polling sites.
So Cynthia, your hand is up. Did you have a comment or question or something you wanted to add?
No,
Cynthia?
sorry.
Oh, that's
I
okay.
forgot to.
No,
take
it's
it down.
fine. No, I just want to, I'm not always the best at getting the hands. And so I'm trying very, very hard to recognize them when they're up. So I think this is, we're at a place to end here for now. Frank, I'm gonna, yes. So we are, it's right afternoon. Our next meeting is July 10th. And that is devoted to talking about this accessibility guide. I am hoping, I don't know if everyone, Megan, I'm going to hope to have something down that's draft like for what we've done so far. And when I say draft, I mean very rough outline, but at least a working point from where we're going to be filling in the gaps. We're also going to try to get more people at the table who are on our stakeholder list that haven't been here. But that's July 10th at 10 o'clock. I have down in person.
Right.
I think we are discussed, folks are hoping to do a hopefully in-person meeting. Obviously, we're going to run it as a hybrid meeting for those, if you know, we're going to run it as a hybrid meeting. But I think if folks can get here for that was the hope of the group. And that would be here at Secretary of State's office in Montpelier. So with that, does anyone have anything else they want to add to the whole group before we adjourn for now? Thank you all. I know these are not easy conversations. I know they're incredibly complicated. They're incredibly thorny, and it's a lot of deep thinking they're having to do here. So I appreciate everyone putting in the time.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
actually do have a comment. Sorry, I know you were doing such a good job wrapping us up. I, we did have a note that said in person. I think we talked about that last time, but in fact, I believe it was going to be the 24th, which because that one was going to be talking about town meeting, and that was
Yeah.
sort of the reason.
Okay.
That would be in
So here's what
person.
I'll do. I will look into that. We'll make sure we got some information about it, or if we need to take a group poll and see who can do what again, or I will follow up on that piece and figure out
Okay.
what
Yeah,
we're doing
just
and
in terms of
what the hope
content.
is.
Yeah, I feel like a
And
guide
I
might
think,
be a good
yeah,
hybrid meeting. Whereas
Yeah,
the town meeting.
that makes sense. Okay, so we're looking at, I'll put a question mark for that one, and I will sort that and follow up with folks by email at some point soon.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all. Much appreciated. Bye-bye.